مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. كما يقول أحد أنبياء التوراة: كأسنا ريا. وكذلك حلقات برنامجنا داخل واشنطن تكون أحيانا مليئة بالأخبار الشيقة والآراء المتعلقة بالسياسة الأمريكية. ليس سهلا أن تقيد ضيوفك الرئيين بمدة 22 دقيقة من المناقشة والجدل في كل أسبوع. لذلك جمعنا كل تلك الدقائق الإضافية التي تحوي خواطر وحكم، واخترنا أفضل المقتطفات وجعلناها من ضمن هذه الحلقة الخاصة. سواء كنتم من أنصار دونالد ترامب أو من مؤيدي جو بايدن، إذا كنتم مدمنين على السياسة الأمريكية ستتعلمون شيئا جديدا من هذه الحلقة الخاصة من برنامجنا. Alex, if Republicans have real opportunity in the Senate, when you look at the U.S. House of Representatives, where they currently have a narrow majority, will they be able to keep this, expand it, or do you think Democrats have a chance to steal this one back?
Well, I don't know. I yet go pretty far back in history where a House majority only lasts for 2 years. So I would think that Republicans have the momentum in the House and are probably going to keep it. I mean, I think a lot depends on redistricting and things like that. And also, the top of the ticket is going to be very important as well. And I think that's true in the House and the Senate. I think my specialty is the Senate. There is a pretty strong correlation between how the presidential race goes and how the Senate races break. And that was true in 2016. It was true in 2012. It was true in 2008. So I think if Trump is at the top of the ticket, if he is the nominee, I think that really helps Democratic incumbents like Sherrod Brown and even John Tester. West Virginia is a little bit more of a wild card because Trump is so popular in West Virginia. It's, that and along with Wyoming is his best state. But with Trump atop the ticket, what it does is it really generates Democratic enthusiasm. And I think that's the challenge they have when polls show that many Democrats don't think that Joe Biden should run for re-election. There is low enthusiasm for him. But if Trump is on the top of the ticket for Republicans, then that generates a lot of Democratic enthusiasm. And I think what was amazing about the 2022 midterm election is that even with Trump not on the ballot, he still was an issue in the race, and he helped Democratic candidates. He hurt Republican candidates. Of course, the abortion issue is another huge factor here in this campaign. And I think what polls show is that voters are now more motivated, pro-choice voters are more motivated to vote on the issue of abortion than they have in past elections. So I think that's going to be, a huge factor. So I would be surprised if Democrats take back the House, but it is, it's a very unusual election because of the abortion issue and because of Trump and because of the unpopularity of the incumbent president.
So, Jim, issue of quality candidates. I know the last time around, there were a few candidates on the Republican side that seemed so out on the fringe that they cost the party some victories. When you look at how various races are shaping up, do you see that Republicans are tending more toward more broadly acceptable candidates, or are we also seeing some of the more extreme candidates winning the party nomination or competing well for the party nomination in battleground races?
Well, I think you see that some of the same attitudes among the Republican base are still prevalent, and so that creates a pathway for some of these insurgent candidates. And the whole narrative of this establishment versus conservative movement versus grassroots type of dynamic, I think still holds a lot of sway with Republican voters. At the same time, there was widespread Republican disappointment that they did not do better in the midterm elections and that they did not capture the Senate majority. So I think those two things are working in tension with each other. I think in most cases, the party's top recruits, where they've gotten them, seem pretty well positioned to win the primary, but it's very early. Jim Justice in West Virginia does seem to be pretty well positioned, but I think it's too early to tell what's really going to happen in Montana. And that has been an issue in that state in the past, where they felt that they've not always gotten the best nominees against Senator Jon Tester. I think candidate quality will matter very much in the race for Senate in Ohio. Now, Sherrod Brown has been able to hold that seat for a while, but he's also been very fortunate in his election cycles up till now. He's generally run in either favorable races for Democrats, or at the same time when former President Barack Obama was winning statewide in Ohio. This is the first time he's going to have to run in a time period where a Republican presidential nominee would be favored pretty heavily to carry that state. So I think that there's a possibility that Republicans will be able to get the candidates that they want, but certainly a lot of the arguments against that are going to be persuasive to a large number of Republican voters.
We're moving now into the realm of the politics of this trial. Norm, first, how are other Republicans reacting? Who's running toward Trump? Who's running away from Trump right now?
So many of the establishment Republicans are rallying behind Trump, and that includes most of the presidential candidates, but not all. We know that the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, has defended Trump. Many of these documents and boxes were kept in a bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, and Kevin McCarthy said, well, a bathroom can be locked. What he neglected to say is that bathrooms are locked from the inside, it's not from the outside. So that meant that a spy could go in and lock the door so nobody else could intrude while going through the boxes. We know that Mitch McConnell, the Senate minority leader, Republican leader, has said he's not going to comment at all. And other Republicans like Lindsey Graham and a host of other leaders have defended Trump, often inaccurately, by saying that the Presidential Records Act meant that Trump could have anything he wanted, which is simply false. Now, a few Republicans have taken a different position. The former Attorney General under Trump, Bill Barr, said that these are extremely serious charges and that they require prosecution and probably conviction. A couple of the presidential candidates, including Asa Hutchinson, the governor of Arkansas, former governor of Arkansas, and now to a degree Nikki Haley, the former ambassador to the United Nations under Trump, have also said this is very serious and different from what we've seen from others. There are a couple of additional points we ought to make here, though, Rob. One is about the judge. As Daniel said, she was overturned in her judgments, but what also has to be said is that she was overturned by a 3-judge panel that included 2 Trump judges and a very conservative Bush appointee, saying that what she tried to do to protect Trump in the middle of an ongoing criminal investigation was unprecedented and simply wrong. She has the power to delay this until after the 2024 election, and she could influence what evidence is permitted. Daniel alluded to a lawyer, Evan Cochran, who said that Trump told him to violate the law and hide these documents. We know that the former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, has apparently decided to talk to the prosecutors. And finally, we know that even if this case is delayed, there are other trials or charges pending. We have a case moving forward in New York. There was a civil trial that he lost on sexual assault. There is a criminal trial potentially ahead, and there may be 2 more federal cases brought against Trump. One is about January 6th, where we still have a grand jury acting, and even yesterday, witnesses, false electors were brought in there. And there may be charges involving documents hidden at Trump's other golf course at Bedminster in New Jersey. So Donald Trump's headaches are multiplying, but we have no clue as to which trials will take place before the election. And we also know that Trump has said not only that he would basically pardon himself if there were any criminal charges and urged others to do so, but that he would focus more on vindicating himself and on vindictive actions against his enemies if he were reelected. This is serious stuff.
So, Alex, I want to ask you about how all this affects Joe Biden's strategy before we break. The general consensus is that of all the Republican candidates, President Biden would prefer to face Donald Trump.
That's right. President Biden loves touting that he's the guy who beat Trump.
Exactly. So there's this litany of legal troubles that Norm just listed. Is this going to undermine the best option for Joe Biden to get reelected?
So interestingly, polling in the days following the indictment announcement shows that Republicans are still with Trump. A large percentage have said, the majority have said that they would still vote for Trump over all the other Republican candidates at this point for the primary. That might be because other Republican candidates maybe aren't attractive enough at this point, and Ron DeSantis is still polling pretty far below Trump, and he's the second in line here at the Republican primary. But in terms of the general election, I think at this point, Trump is likely to lose, more moderate Republicans. We saw in the midterms even that Republican candidates who were really hard right lost some support from people who are more in the middle. I think independents are going to look at this list of piling up legal charges and not want to vote for a president with all of this baggage, even if he's not, even if these trials haven't actually happened by the time the election comes up. So I think right now the White House's strategy of sitting back, not talking about this, trying to stay out of it is actually a good one, because they can see how this plays out for people that aren't, Trump's fierce, loyal base, who are going to back him, who are actually really hardened by this, and their support is hardened by this. They, anything that Trump does, kind of, it seems like they'll support him and back him and actually even love him more sometimes. But I think they can see how it plays out with other Republicans, more centrist ones who don't want a president with this much baggage.
And Daniel, just to clarify before we break for our viewers, does a conviction on a felony invalidate Trump as a candidate according to our laws, or is that ultimately determined by our voters?
I think the Constitution allows voters to elect someone theoretically from jail and convicted of a felony, and so it's kind of a quirk of our system. I don't think the founders 250 years ago envisioned that we would have a president who took all of their, these nuclear secrets. They didn't have nuclear weapons back in the 1700s with him, and, was kind of a pack rat. And so theoretically he could, win the presidency from jail or from prison. But of course he's going to, once he gets convicted, he'll appeal, and that'll take a long time and might go to the Supreme Court. And so I don't think he's going to face jail time anytime soon, but it's not out of the question.
So I think that is one of the understatements on the 19 years on this show, that the founders did not envision where we are today in American politics. Thank you very much for helping to explain this to our viewers abroad. Any particular candidate among the second tier that have recently announced that we should be watching closely? Now, on one level, the huge number suggests that significant Republicans think that Trump has political weakness, but the fundamental logic is the more candidates, the better for Donald Trump. Isn't that right, Sarah?
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of Republicans are worried about. Right now, there's been no coordination to decide, well, who's going to drop out when. Obviously, it's way too early from that. We're a long ways away from even the first primary, but there's almost certainly going to need to be some sort of realigning after the first couple of primaries if Donald Trump is able to pull ahead. These anti-Trump forces are going to need to have some conversations, and right now it's not clear who would do that. There's not a leading anti-Trump voice in the Republican Party. That's why Trump has always been able to keep going, to remain the front runner in this race. So what I'm going to be really watching to see is, will there be any kind of public effort, private effort from some of the anti-Trump voices in the party who have been reluctant to speak out so far? I think of someone like Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Right now, there's not even a willingness in the Republican Party to pick favorites in primaries to help their candidates win in Senate or House races. They really leave everything pretty hands off and kind of let the base pick who they want to have. And that so far that's been extending to the presidential primaries as well. Obviously a much riskier bet. That's a much more high stakes race. So I'm curious to see if that does change in the next year or so. But if so, we're going to be looking to see who is that voice who's willing to speak out and try to get the party to align behind just one candidate that's not Trump.
I mean, I know that Chris Christie is taking on the character of the attack dog directly against Donald Trump, almost sacrificing his own candidacy in the process. When you look at the range of alternative candidates, who's the big beneficiary of any loss of Trump support? What do you think, Minnie?
I mean, I think it's got to be DeSantis, because he has, he's the only candidate who's kind of come close at all to challenging Trump. But the thing is like he's just not that close. So I think we're just not seeing these attacks really have an impact. Like, I think we talk about these legal troubles that Trump is facing, and you kind of expect that to hurt Trump. But actually, it's just kind of underscoring his strength and kind of putting these other candidates in this strange position where they're the ones who have to be careful what they say and be careful not to turn off those voters who are going to like Trump no matter what he does, and be careful not to kind of hurt their image by criticizing these voters' favorite candidates.
Interesting. Is there, Naomi, is there some white knight out there that we're still waiting to hear from in the Republican Party?
I'm not sure about a Republican Party white knight, but there's also sort of speculation about a third party bid from a party such as No Labels. Maybe there's sort of a unity ticket between West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin and former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, which will be able to unite sort of these anti-Trump forces, because I just don't know whether the base wants to hear it. But obviously third party bids have they sort of create havoc in a general election. Whether that helps Trump or helps Biden is sort of something that people that are much better at math in terms of counting electoral votes and things like that are sort of going to be looking out for.
Sarah, just this is a new term for most of our viewers. Can you take a few seconds and just describe what No Labels is?
Sure. As Naomi was describing, there's always been an effort that to create a space for politicians who are sort of in the middle, who are not Democrats, who are not Republicans in the most establishment sense. So they've been this group. No Labels is one of them. There's a couple others. Third Way is an example. They've been trying to come up with a space for these politicians to actually exist. It's very difficult when there's not any money to be flowing to candidates who are trying to win in these spaces. Which primary, they'd have to obviously pick a party, because it's basically impossible to win as an independent in most races across the country. So it's supporting Republicans who lean more towards the center, or supporting Democrats who lean more towards the center. But this is very controversial in a world where the establishment Democrats and the establishment Republicans are the ones that set the agenda. They're the ones that come up with campaign strategies, and a group like No Labels from the congressional side has been kind of mucking things around for a little bit, just making it a little bit harder for the establishment parties. But in terms of a presidential election, I don't think we've ever seen anything like that. There has been a lot of talk of someone like a Joe Manchin running for president and trying to come up with this unity ticket, as we were talking about. it's something that most people are highly skeptical of, just because, again, how do you support this knowing the possible risks to your own party? Even if you're not the biggest Joe Biden fan, you're not the biggest Donald Trump fan, if he is the nominee, you're coming up with a lot of risks for the party if you were to go this way. So it's definitely something getting a lot of buzz in DC recently. It's not something that people are always thrilled to talk about.
And just to remind our viewers, no third-party candidate has ever won the presidency of the United States, unless you go all the way back to Abe Lincoln, who won a minority vote for president when 3 big candidates were on the ballot. But our system, first past the post, generates a focus on 2 parties. And the 2 parties have been competing it out, with third parties playing a spoiler role, but never actually competing for the top position. John, does Kevin McCarthy, is he more likely to expand his majority by being seen as a can-do leader who helps get things done, which may require making deals with the opposition, or as a crusading partisan taking on the White House and fighting Democrats at every turn?
So I think he's almost certain to be the latter. The Republican leaders have been really good at what we call negative agenda control, stopping passage of legislation. What we call positive agenda control, getting stuff passed, has been a difficult thing for the Republicans, even when they had unified control of Congress. So it's people like John Boehner, very different from Pelosi, and just not being able to successfully pass things.
David, do you agree? Crusader or deal maker? Kevin McCarthy.
Well, I don't think he's going to have any choice but to be a crusader. I mean, first of all, whether he gains or loses seats in the next election is going to be in large part a function of who the presidential nominee is versus whoever the Democratic nominee is, and how the parties do in that regard. Kevin McCarthy's biggest challenge is he's going to have a right flank that's insistent on trying to do things that Republicans don't have the votes to do. This was one of the things that hurt John Boehner, and it's also one of the things that hurt Paul Ryan, John Boehner's successor. In order for McCarthy to cut deals and actually get some things done that Republicans want, they would have to be willing, number one, to stick together through an entire negotiation. And he has a very small margin in which to do that. He can only lose maybe 2 or 3 Republicans on any vote if all Democrats are opposed, and they're likely to be opposed almost all of the time. And so if McCarthy, for instance, was able to say, okay, we're going to pass our wish list, and then, of course, the Senate's going to throw it back at us, and the Senate combined with Biden is going to throw it back at us. But then we're going to negotiate and stick together, and we're only going to get incremental change. It's going to be small, but it's going to move the ball down the field a little bit. We're going to get some progress in a conservative direction. And if they all agreed to do that and then go to a signing ceremony with Joe Biden and say, look what we did, then McCarthy can actually get some things done. But what is most likely to happen, past his prologue, is that his right flank will demand things that the Democratic Senate and Joe Biden, a Democrat in the White House, simply won't do. And then a third to a quarter of Kevin McCarthy's conference will balk and simply say, we're not going to do it. And that is going to leave him in a sort of no man's land. And he's going to have to decide to do what John Boehner did or not, which is fine. I'll work with Democrats to pass something, for instance, to keep the government operational, or to keep the Defense Department funded, or to raise the debt ceiling, or not. And if the answer is not, then we end up in some sort of legislative quagmire.
We're going to have to end with all bets are off. Thank you so much for joining me on داخل واشنطن. بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. أراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وحتى ذلك حين شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.